Yes, I hope. My story, like Carmel's, is about a woman who her portrait becomes famous, and she becomes well known for her portrait, so it's also about a woman and an artist. It's new, so bear with me. Wife with knife. Rafe was a drunk when I married him, but he wasn't famous. Fame came later after his third one-man show. Suddenly everyone loved him. The students, of course, he'd been at the Art Institute for years, so I was used to eager young girls phoning and fawning. But after the Times review, it was society women and gallery owners and rock stars. My best friend Pamela was in there too, the snake, and I was sick of it. Every day when I came home from work, there were new messages saying, "Oh, you're so wonderful. Come speak to our university. Come accept our prizes." I should have been happy for Rafe, but I wasn't. The man hadn't changed. He was still a miser, a bore, and a pessimist. He still had bad breath, an athlete's foot, and terrible table manners. And I was still the frump chopping onions by the sink who got beat up twice a year. I guess I was jealous. So one night I stupidly reminded him that I too was an artist and had had my own one-man show before we were married, and Rafe emptied his bottle and glared at me, and I knew what was coming. Every painter's wife thinks they can paint, followed by if you really wanted to paint, you would be painting every day, followed by I couldn't stand to be married to another painter, followed by I couldn't stand to be married to a bad painter, followed by which is what you are and always will be. And pretty soon he was going at me with the kitchen chairs, and I was coming back at him with everything I could lay my hands on. While we were being treated in emergency, it occurred to me that I was as bad for Rafe as he was for me, and I would do us both a favor if I would just get out. So I moved into a neighbor's barn where there was no toilet, and I had to shit on newspapers, but it wasn't as bad as it sounds. A jazz guitarist moved in for a while, and there were a few other men, but nothing until the next year when I met Ashford Fott, the Scottish poet. Ash wasn't as famous as Rafe, and he didn't have Rafe's beauty, but he had one of those long faces like a collie's that I've always liked, and a virginal pink and white body like a young girl's, and a marvelous voice full of choked passion. He was very attentive, very well-educated, wonderful manners. He said, "Come live with me," and I thought, no, I can't do that. But when I heard Rafe had moved in with Pamela, I packed my things and flew to Edinburgh. Ash had a little cottage by the coast, and we should have been happy, but we weren't. It was cold and gray by the water, and we were cold and gray too, like characters out of a Bergman movie. The sex was good, but everything we said was wrong. I had never lived with a poet before, and the silence was oppressive. I couldn't whistle or yell or dance to the radio, and the smell of turpentine gave Ash migraines, so I could only work when he was gone. He was gone a lot. He had 2 daughters in London and a young son in Glasgow and a mother in Dumfries. One Sunday he set off to see his mother and said he'd be back around 9. 9 came, 10, 11, 12. At 1, I decided to read his journals. Ash's journals were these leather-bound jobbies with his initials in gold on the cover, and inside they were, "Attended the symphony, enjoyed the Mahler especially, just finished Keith's letters," all that crap. And the real life was recorded on little scraps of paper that were stuck in helter-skelter. I realized that Ashford Fott was a man who shook his journals out over a wastepaper basket on December 31st of every year, so that all was left was this pristine record for his biographers to admire and be bored by. Piecing the paper scraps together, I learned that Ash had been seeing 3 different women since he'd met me. 2 of them had fallen by the wayside, but 1 remained, and her name was Bettina. And you know, he'd even made a list with Bettina's name on one side and mine on the other, and under Bettina he'd put owns house in London, and under mine he'd put was married to Rafe McAteer. After I stopped screaming, I went straight to Ash's address book and found Bettina. It was now 4 a.m., and I called and she answered, and I said, "Hello, is Ashford Fott there, please?" And she said, "Well, yes, actually he is." And I said, "May I speak to him, please?" And she said, "Just a minute." And then Ash came on, and I said, "Hello, Ash, it's me." And he said, "My God, is anything wrong?" And I said, "No, nothing's wrong. I just wondered when you were coming home." And he said, "I'll leave right now if you want." And I said, "Fine, if that will be convenient." And he said, "Actually, it would be more convenient to come around 8 tomorrow morning." So we hung up, and I went around figuring out ways to set his cottage on fire. But instead, I called Rafe, and I said, "Honey, I just realized I'm once again in a place I don't want to be." And he said, "Well, then come back to me." And I said, "But you're with Pamela." And he said, "She doesn't need to know." And I said, God, you're a rat. And he said, you like rats. And I had to agree. I've started to paint again, I added, but Rafe had dropped the phone by then, and I could hear the Shostakovich she liked to listen to when he was working. And I could imagine him standing in his studio with his bourbon in one hand and his paintbrush in the other, and I wondered if he was still painting those hideous portraits of me. I sat by the door, and when Ash crept in at 8 the next morning, I asked him to choose, and he said he already had. He was just letting Bettina down easy because she was high-strung, and he didn't want to hurt her. And why didn't we, the two of us, go off to the Highlands and be alone together? So we got in the car and drove up to the Highlands, and it was awful there. And I said, you know, I really miss our walks along the beach. Let's head back. And Ash said, right. So we headed back, and we were in the cottage lying side by side on the bed when we heard a key in the lock, and Bettina walked in. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and Ash threw his hands up and screamed something and ran out the door and onto the beach. What did he say? I asked Bettina. I can't cope, she repeated. Would you like a cup of tea? I said. What a good idea, she said. We talked, and it turned out Bettina and Ash had plans to get married. I'm actually surprised you're even here, she said. She looked at me. What was it like, she asked, being married to Rafe McAteer? Weren't you his muse? All those portraits she mused of you in the kitchen? Well, I was damned if I was going to respond to that, so I waited. She waited too. After a while, she said, Ash is deeply divided. Well, in a situation like that, someone has to win. And when Ash crept back in to beg my forgiveness, it looked like I was the winner. But another few days of me being quiet and him having migraines had us both so exhausted that I finally said, listen, why don't you go spend a week with Bettina and then decide? And he said very quickly, all right. And he packed right away. And I went to my friend Kiki's in London, and she had this marvelous flat right by the South Kensington stop with huge windows, and you could see the gardens and the guard horses. And Kiki was in the theater there, and soon I was meeting actors and musicians and dancers, and after a week or two I began seeing Jean-Paul, so I didn't go back to Ash again. Nor did I ever go back to Rafe, though I almost did once after he divorced Pamela. But by then he'd met the little waitress from Thailand and begun having those children he'd always said he didn't want, so it was too late. It hurts to think of the way he died, and I still argue with his ghost when I'm alone in my studio, furious that he wouldn't stop painting long enough to just go see a doctor and get the damn thing cut out. Last week I went to his retrospective at the Met, like everyone else, and I stood there, like everyone else, while the docent stopped by his most famous painting and raved on and on about the color, the composition, and the use of space and light. Notice the abstract figuration of the woman chopping onions by the sink, she thought. I waited for her to point out the almost imperceptible drop of red on the tip of the woman's knife, but the docent said nothing. No one ever has. The critics have missed it, the collectors have missed it, the biographers have missed it too. I'm beginning to think I'm the only person in the world who knows it's there, though for the life of me, I'm still not sure if it's Rafe's blood or mine.